Indyliveradio.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Clacks Women for Independence podcast. So in the wake of the release of the Russia report and also Comrade Johnsonowicz visit to Orkney, we thought it would be nice to have a bit of a Russian flavour to this week's podcast. So that opening music was called From Russia with Love by Homa Homa. It's copyright-free music, which you can get on YouTube. And we're also going to include a poem which is in our poetry show this week. And it's an absolutely beautiful rendition of a poem called The Yearning by Mikhail Lermontov. And we've got it performed in Russian and in Scots. So, well, in Russian and in Scottish. When we get there, I'll tell you a little bit more about Lermontov because he's a very interesting character. But first, let's pop along to Orkney. And it was actually quite a fun day on social media on the 23rd when Johnson was in Orkney. Trending on Twitter was hashtag Boris Farewell Tour, which I loved. And there was also little clips which Yes Orkney had been sending, I think, to Independence Live, which were being picked up by the mainstream media, which is unusual but welcome. And there was an awful lot of positive response, certainly in the Guardian, which I keep an eye on. And one thing they particularly liked was a banner calling him the Crime Minister, which was quite nice. There were also people there protesting about his treatment of the NHS, for example. It wasn't all yes folk, or it wasn't all people brandishing saltires. And whoever came up with the idea that it would be useful to have him pose holding giant crabs needs to rethink their career. Unless, of course, it is a double bluff, and that was so that everybody would make the same joke about Johnson having crabs and take our eye off whatever else was going on in the Westminster administration that day. And nowadays, unfortunately, you can never be sure which it is. You can never really take your eye off what's going on in Westminster either. But first, the Yes Orkney, at incredibly short notice, put on a great show of a welcoming committee, if you like, with a massive big yes sign covered with signatures. They had saltires. They were standing socially distanced along the road. They were wearing masks. They were doing everything right. They were getting a huge amount of support from cars as they came off, I presume, the ferry. So Johnson would have got a feel straight away for the kind of welcome he was getting. So we'll start with the little clip that they sent back, which is on Independence Live's YouTube if you want to see the actual clip. But I'm just going to play the audio from it, which I think might be Fiona Graham from the Orkney News. I'm not sure. I think it might be her. It's quite interesting because she gives a little bit of information about just how few Tory votes it takes to get into Parliament. So here's the news from Orkney.
At this little car park. And of course some will be already in Kirkwall for them arriving there. And again, if you see people standing in a group, it's because those are family groupings or close friends. Everybody is being quite sensible. There's a lot of masks getting worn as well. Because in Orkney, like everywhere else, we've had deaths here with COVID-19. 2 people sadly died very early on into the pandemic coming here. Since then, we've had only a handful of confirmed cases, 9. We have a testing lab in Orkney at our new Balfour Hospital. But of course, normally we would have 140 odd cruise ships coming in Orkney in the summer, hundreds of tour buses, and there's been none of that. The island economy, which had become heavily reliant actually on tourism, maybe something to think about there, took a heavy blow with that. Well, that's somebody saying that it's just coming into Finstown now, so let's see. That was a car with Boris as a twat coming along there as well in the official tourage. Just a reminder, folks, that the Conservatives got 435 votes in 2016 in Orkney. About 4% lost their deposit again. But the guy that stood then, he is actually an MSP because he was on the list. Because Tories got MPs elected in Scotland, he moved up the list. And so despite losing his deposit in Orkney and only getting 435 votes, he is an MSP. So something a wee bit wrong there maybe, eh? That's it, folk are dispersing now. It's another protect the NHS poster there.
And Boris didn't pass the crowds. He came, people are already starting to leave to go maybe through to their next port of call, but he didn't even bother to pass the crowds. They took the skirting route. Wasn't quite hiding in the fridge, but it was his next best thing.
Running down.
And of course the wonderful Janie Godley got in on the act.
Get out, Boris. I don't want to. They don't like me here. Where are we? I mean, there's a woman, she looks angry. There's no one here, Boris, it's just us. I can see people in the distance. There's people out there and I don't think they like me. Is there anywhere more isolated?
Oh, love Janie. Anyway, all of these clips that I've taken the audio from are on YouTube, and I have popped them in with the Clacks WFI podcast playlist on the Indyliveradio YouTube site if you want to go and have a look at any of them, and they're well worth having a look at. So now that Yes Orkney have set the standard, it's up to the rest of us to get organised and do what we can for the rest of his trip, and I believe that his travel plans are for the 4th of August, Dumfries, the 5th of August, West Aberdeenshire, the 7th, Banff-and-Buchan, the 8th, Ayr, and the 9th, Berwick. So pretty much a tour of the Tory strongholds. No doubt he will be hiding in a scout hut near you. But if there's anything that local Yes groups can do to give him a similar welcome to the Yes Orkney folks, go to it. And if there's anything the rest of us can do to help, please shout. Now, the other remarkable thing about Johnson's short notice arrival on Orkney was that he didn't have the common courtesy to let our First Minister know that he was visiting at all. It's a bit like your neighbour sneaking in the back door to your house, raiding your fridge, complaining about your decor, saying your furniture's shit, then stomping out again. Rude. They clearly don't teach manners at Eton. And typically, although the First Minister's COVID briefing was about COVID and she was at great pains to try and keep to the topic, inevitably the headline-seeking journalists were determined to bring it back to Boris and also the economy, the independence, you name it, whatever they could shoehorn in there. And of course she dealt with it beautifully, but she also took the opportunity, I think, to make some very important points whilst at the same time not talking about independence. So I'm just going to play a couple of little clips from the First Minister's briefing on the 23rd.
Thank you. Boris Johnson has said that the response, particularly economically, to the pandemic has shown the strength and might of the union. We can probably take it as read that you don't agree with that. How have the two governments been working together?
On the question about the Prime Minister's visit today, look, this is a COVID briefing. People of all political persuasions and none watch this briefing to get information, and I want to make sure that it doesn't get pulled into the political arena. Apart from that, my focus is not on political campaigning right now. As I think you've seen every day for the past few months, it's on dealing with an ongoing, very serious situation. So I'll limit my comments here to the COVID aspects of this. I've tried very hard and will continue to work very hard to have a very collaborative approach with the other governments of the UK. That's not just the UK government, but the Welsh government and the Northern Irish government, because I think that is in all of our interests. But I will also be very assertive in the right of the Scottish Government, where we consider, not for political or constitutional considerations, but for public health considerations, our ability to take our own decisions if that is in Scotland's best interests. On some of the points around the support through COVID that the Prime Minister has been, I understand, making today, on the financial support, that's been very welcome, and Fiona and I and others have welcomed it repeatedly. But let's be clear, this is borrowed money, and the reason it is coming to the Scottish Government from the UK Government is that the UK Government holds the borrowing powers that Scotland doesn't hold. Scottish taxpayers will pay the cost of that borrowing just in the same way as taxpayers across the UK Government will. So it's not some kind of favour that's been done for Scotland. And if the Scottish Government held the borrowing powers, we would be able to provide that support directly, and perhaps we would be able to have greater flexibility in how we design these schemes, just as where we do have autonomous decision making, for example, in the decisions we're making to come out of lockdown, we are designing those decisions in a way that best meets Scotland's needs and circumstances. And I suppose my only final point on this would be, I don't think any of us, and I include myself in this, should be trying to use COVID and the pandemic and the crisis situation we have faced and continue to face as some kind of political campaigning tool. This is a pandemic that has taken the lives of more than 50,000 people across the UK. We've all tried to do our best, but I don't think any of us have got any grounds to crow or to feel satisfied about this. It's not politics, it's not constitutional arguments. Every leader of every country right now has a real duty to remain focused on doing everything we can to tackle this and not use it as some kind of political weapon. So I'll continue to focus as hard as I can on the job in front of me, and I'm sure the Prime Minister is well able to speak for himself.
Yes, as the First Minister has said, that state governments across the world can use their powers to borrow. And to give you an indication of what that means for the UK government, the public sector net debt rose to £1.98 trillion, or 99.6% of GDP in June 2020. And that's the highest debt to GDP ratio since 1960-61. The OBR has also indicated that the UK's fiscal deficit is likely to reach between 15 to 23% of GDP in 2021. Now, to give you an idea, that's depending on the speed of economic recovery, that's the highest peacetime level in 300 years. So countries across the world are dealing with debt in order to tackle business issues. Just very briefly, I can say that I have regular discussions with the UK government, productive and constructive. I have discussions with my Welsh and Northern Irish counterparts, with Nadeem Zahawi on a weekly or fortnightly basis. I also speak regularly to Alex Sharma, the Secretary of State. So currently we're looking to try and influence the UK government's economic recovery in relation to energy. We hold certain powers, they hold certain powers. If we really want to unlock a green recovery, we need the UK to use its powers in relation to transmission and regulations in particular. So that's a very practical example of what we need to do, because our priority is economic recovery, our priority is jobs.
But my primary responsibility is to take the right decisions, or the best decisions I can take for Scotland. And my primary responsibility is to do that in a very straightforward way and not be influenced by politics or constitutional arguments. And that's what I've tried to do. And some people, might be happy with that. Other people might be frustrated with that. But I take that responsibility to steer this country as safely as I can through this crisis. As I think I've said before, probably more seriously than I've taken anything in my political career. And I'm going to continue to do that to the best of my ability for as long as it takes. And Kieran Jenkins from Channel 4.
I know you want to limit your comments to the coronavirus response, but the Prime Minister has been talking directly about the pandemic response, and he has said that it has shown the sheer might of the union in Scotland. Do you think he has a point?
No, I don't, and for a couple of reasons. As I've said, some of the things I think he references are simply a feature of where power lies. If Scotland was an independent country, then just like Ireland or many of the other small countries, we'd be doing these things ourselves. So in that sense, I think it's a bit of a redundant argument. On a more fundamental level, I just don't think any of us should be championing and celebrating a pandemic that has taken thousands of lives as some, example of the pre-existing political case we want to make. This has been a heartbreaking crisis that we're not out of yet, that too many people have died, and all of us have a really, really solemn responsibility to focus on and to get our countries through. And that's what I'm going to continue to do, taking the decisions I think are best for Scotland in all of the circumstances we face. Campaigning right now is not my priority. Boris Johnson has every right to be on a campaign visit to Scotland today. In his shoes, it's not how I would be choosing to spend my time, given what we are facing right now. And people can make up their own minds about these things, and can make up their own minds about where they think the decisions that we're having to take right now are best taken. But none of us should be crowing about this pandemic in a political sense, is my honest opinion. I don't want to sort of focus too much on Boris Johnson's visit today. He can say why he's here and why he's doing certain things and not other things. I would have met with Boris Johnson had he asked me to, had he come to Edinburgh to meet. I have spoken to him since the last COBRA meeting. I think from memory of, if there's been a more recent occasion, then I will correct this later, but I think from memory the last time I spoke to Boris Johnson was on the day of the dreadful knife attack in Glasgow, when he very graciously called with his sympathies for what had happened then. So I've had conversations with him on the phone, and we will continue to speak when necessary. But I've got a job to do. He's got a job to do as well. I'm focusing on the job I've got to do. We are thankfully in a better position with this virus than we've been for 4 months, but we take our eye off the ball of this at our peril. And I'm very mindful of that every day, that if I get dragged on to other issues and focus on issues, I'm a politician. Of course, I enjoy political debate and I enjoy political sparring, and I look forward to getting back to that, because it will mean this crisis is under control. But right now, it would be a dereliction of my responsibility to take my eye off the coronavirus ball, because that's the point at which we risk it going backwards. So I'm just going to go on with my job and let the Prime Minister speak for himself. When I was talking earlier on about the power of autonomous decision making, this is it. We can take decisions that we think are right for Scotland, because matching England in the pace of exit from lockdown may well mean matching England in a higher number of infections and deaths as well. And I don't think many people in Scotland would want us necessarily to do that.
Do you think there are lessons that the UK government could learn from the approach that has been taken up here? And are you disappointed then that the Prime Minister has not found any time to meet you to discuss this?
Do I think there are things that the UK government could learn from Scotland? Yes, I do. An approach that's very much driven by the objective of elimination, I think, is one thing that they could learn. And I've said before, I would encourage the UK government to do that, because I think that would help all of the countries of the UK to drive the infection to the lowest possible level, put us in the strongest position going into winter, and also minimise the risk of us going backwards again if the virus runs out of control again. And, you know, if Boris Johnson wants to stop in Edinburgh on his way back down the road today, I'm not sure he'll be travelling in a way that makes that possible. But if he wants to stop in Edinburgh this afternoon for a discussion about these things, I will make time to meet him. So, you know, the offer is always open.
And finally, there is an old saying that if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And I don't think Chris Musson has heard that saying.
Chris Musson from The Sun.
Mr. Minister, as you said, huge borrowing has been required to support the economy in the pandemic, with the 4.6 billion coming to Scotland. You also tweeted about independence this morning. So can I ask, how would an independent Scotland manage such crisis borrowing in its early years, perhaps its first decade, while not having its own currency, which, of course, is the plan of the SNP's Growth Commission? Because economists and indeed critics within your independence movement have said that without control of monetary policy or an effective central bank, your plan, the sterlingisation plan, could make borrowing more difficult or more expensive. So as well as explaining how we've managed to secure this level of borrowing, can you tell us, does this crisis mean you could now rethink this Growth Commission policy?
I'll come on to the arguments about independence when we're focusing on the arguments about independence. I've got a pandemic to deal with right now, and that's what I'm going to focus on doing. But in short, just in a couple of sentences, maybe the way to answer the question of how would an independent Scotland cope with borrowing is to look at how independent Ireland already does it, or independent Denmark or New Zealand, or any of the other countries across the world that are having to borrow right now. Some of them bigger than Scotland, some of them smaller than Scotland, some of them the same size to Scotland. So maybe there's some lessons to be learned there as well. But I'm going to focus on the pandemic right now, because I think that's what people across the country expect me to do. Tom Gordon from the Herald.
Well, Minister, they actually have their own currencies, though, so that's not.
I'm not. Look, Chris, I am doing a COVID briefing right now. There will be plenty of opportunities in the future for me to get into debates and answer questions about currency, about borrowing rates. That's not what this briefing is for, and I don't think it is what most of the people watching it want to hear. So I've said what I'm going to say. I've tried to answer your question to some extent. You'll get plenty of opportunities in the future to ask me and grill me and scrutinise me and all of these things. And when we get to that stage, I'll be delighted to engage with that. But right now, this is a briefing about COVID, and that's what I'm going to try to stick to.
But it's you who brought up both independence and borrowing today, so that's why I asked you the question.
And I tweeted earlier on in response to the Prime Minister's visit that is different to standing here in a Scottish Government building doing a briefing about COVID. And I'm making the obvious point that independent countries the world over borrow money, and an independent Scotland would be in no different position. What I'm saying to you is, if you want to get into the guts and the detail and the intricacies of that, now is not the time for that. I'm more than happy to do that on future occasions. Tom Gordon from the Herald.
Now we're going to pay our traditional visit to the Clacks WFI virtual coffee shop. A little bit shorter this week because we had some sound problems with technology, but here's a little flavour of what the discussions were about.
Sorry, I just wonder if there'll be a fight back by any of the brands, because like the Baxters, obviously the soups are getting absolutely mean to death now. So I just wonder if they'll put solicitors on it to send out lawyers' letters threatening the, brand copyright and all this kind of crap.
If an ordinary person makes a tweet that's disparaging about a soup company,
that's legal, surely. Oh, you mean using the images of the soup tins?
Yeah. So I just wonder if they'll regard it as such a menace to their business that they'll just orchestrate sort of lawyers' letters and that kind of thing. Knowing that there's absolutely nothing they can do about it, it'll probably make it worse.
I would think what's more of a menace to their business is all the photographs of Baxter's factory with the Tories standing in front of it. Yeah.
Well, I liked yesterday, the wee clip I listened to, somebody was, and I think it was an Indie Live one, but the lady was saying, and she said, there's this Tory MP who got 435 votes. The only reason that he's in is because he's on it, and he lost his deposit, but he's still an MP because he got in via the list seats.
Yeah, MSP, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Nicola tweeted about the Times cartoon, because quite often she just like stays back from it and lets things happen in Twitter sphere that just happen. But that obviously, she was like, she was just basically saying, yeah, the Times cartoonist has got it right.
But she got absolutely pelted for that at the press briefing, although she dealt with it beautifully but they were desperate. They just kept asking question after question about independence. And she's going, I'm here to talk about COVID.
But again, them doing that and the people watching it, because the people watching it are watching it about COVID, so her reiterating that fact just reinforces it. And there's an awful lot more people than just SNP members watching it. I know plenty of people who watch that who have had no interest in politics whatsoever before.
Yeah.
I've now got friends saying, I check the government website every day. I look at the breakdown of local authorities to see the numbers and things. Again, for a whole host of different reasons, because people are doing so. I've got one friend who is a pharmacy technician in a hospital, but she's also a gym instructor. So the concern is what's happening with the gyms and when are they going to open, and they've started planning for phase 4, but then kind of got told over the last couple of days that don't expect phase 4 will be bang on 3 weeks like we've tried to do. We've set out a schedule, but it's just a schedule that can be amended. It very much depends on the data we get, the information we get, not just from here, but from abroad as well. You've seen when schools have opened, they've ended up having outbreaks or wee spikes as a result of that. So, but then on the other hand, you get people, and everyone takes it from their own point of view. So if you make your livelihood as a gym instructor, or even some of it, because I know quite a lot of the gym instructors all do something else, and the gym instructors it's a second job to them, but one that makes a valuable contribution to their finances. And I can understand their frustration when they're saying, God, people can go to pubs now, but they can't come into gyms. When they're going to go to pubs, they're going to drink, they're going to end up not socially distancing because they've had too much to drink, but they can't come to a gym where you're going there to keep yourself fit. Even though I know what they're saying is they've been into the gyms, they've looked at the size of the studios they have, they've been marking out 3x3 squares on the floor so that's giving you your sort of 2 metre square and a metre around that as well. So they're really limiting the number they can have in classes. And then to get told, well, actually, maybe gyms won't be opening.
In my, usual parenting tour of play parks of Clackmannanshire and Stirlingshire, I've seen a few what look like yoga instructors and like personal trainers who are doing the outdoor stuff. I haven't seen them in the rain, but certainly, it looks like they'll take 1 or 2 people at a time, and then you can see they're carefully looking to make sure not just what people are doing, but the communication is much easier in that setup.
Somebody yesterday was running a boot camp in the car park for 15 people. Now, there's supposed to be, it's a 1-to-5 ratio that they've been told about they can do if they're outside. And this person's argument was, well, there's 3 of us are instructors, so that allows there to be more people. And we were like, this is somebody just twisting the guidance to suit so they can get more people there. And I don't know whether that was something people were paying for or whether it was a location for people to go where there was a reasonable amount of space for people to exercise. I suppose actually a car park there, you've got the car park bays marked out, haven't you? It's just pick your car parking space and that you stay in that space, do not leave that space.
Yeah, but I suppose, I mean, the argument would be if, folk can stand outside Holyrood with placards at socially distant spaces, then why can't we do this at socially distant spaces?
We could be doing lunges with a placard.
That should be the next march. We do it like the Ministry of Funny Walks, the whole march.
They'll have to make it about a quarter of the length as well, though, because we're all so unfit for sitting on our bums for 3 months. Your picture this week for the podcast, Tulare, got a lot of positive. I'm thinking Christmas, you need to be doing a set of prints or something that we can buy for Christmas presents.
Yes, I can do arrange that.
Yeah. Just leave it with the wee political snippets in there, because the kind of people we're giving presents to will probably appreciate that.
Well, everyone last year just got, the postcards that we had with the bridges on it. Yeah, all I did was one at the top of one of the kind of stanchions. I just drew a wee silver star with a silver pen, and handed that out as my Christmas cards. It went through all my neighbours' doors.
That's clever.
I'm sure people roll their eyes when they get things from me, but I stick at it.
I wrapped my presents in copies of The National last year.
Why not? Have you got anything framed up at the moment?
Have we got anything framed up?
I'm thinking, I've got a stall at Doon where I sell crap, and I've got tons of stuff to do, but I've not got anything political, and I wonder if we should start trying the political angle.
Well, I was thinking the other day that, socially distancing a stall might not be that difficult if you had sort of a person at either end of it, and selling a few bits and pieces to get a kind of little fighting fund going, or even, raising money for whoever. I thought your prints, a print of the cartoons you're doing, the ones that are getting the bigger responses. So actually, even if we just did a 2 or 3 of them and had a few copies, I bet they'd sell like hotcakes. What do you do at Doon, Neil? What else do you have? What other crap do you have on your stall?
I went skip diving the other day. My friends, no. It was an orange terracotta, actually very kind of fusty, mossy turtle that my friend said. She said, it's not even mine. She said, the bloody kitchen fitters brought it from his own garden and put it in the skip. I know our kitchen fitter, so I went and took it out. I've been sending her pictures that I've totally covered it in saltires. But yeah, we had Jim Fairley speaking to us about his kind of proposal around parties putting in their manifestos that if we get a majority of parties that want independence, that one of the things that's going to be in the manifesto is that we will claim back our constitutional rights to do basically whatever we want, and then we would have a referendum that way, and that would kind of circumnavigate this Section 30 issue. And he was talking about the Act of Union and the Treaty of Union, and saying that the Act of Union is something that's in law, and because that's in law, it can't really be changed. But the Treaty of Union is something that both parties have signed up to, and it's got a clause in it that says that no one party can overrule the other party. It has to be kind of an agreement. So you're saying, and if they go back to if they try to take you to court over the Treaty of Union.
But in fairness, he was doing it from a SNP point of view. So, although this was ideas that were being put forward by him personally after research, it was a very much kind of opinions related to the SNP and what would be palatable for the SNP voter. So it wasn't a complete yes movement answer. It was just his opinion on that sort of perspective. So, for example, he was saying that too many SNP voters would vote against independence, and therefore that would be a kind of threat against any UDI-style policy put forward by the SNP. That was his opinion on that, and that's why that was discounted as an appropriate sort of way forward for government to pursue it.
Interesting.
Yeah, because he said the number of people that vote for the SNP because of their good governance, but they still don't want independence. Yeah. Which is kind of irritating. You think that's just picking and choosing what they want because it suits them. And
There's not even any logic to it, because you look at them and you think, if that's what they can do with one hand tied behind their back, how much more could they do if they had all the powers that they need? It's a ridiculous argument. I see there's been an update from Martin Keating's as well. The Section 30 case has reached another milestone point, and there was a deadline for, I'm not sure what it was, final comments to be put in by either side, and the UK government's comments came in. They've had about 6 weeks, I think, for this. Closing point was 5 o'clock. The comments went in at 4:30.
One thing I thought was interesting about the latest voting intentions, when they showed it on the map, there's the one little red Edinburgh South is still
Ian Murray.
But Orkney and Shetland had turned yellow.
Yeah, from the Lib Dem.
From Liberal, yeah, and that's interesting. But I think, certainly from the last election, because I used to work with a girl from Orkney, and she said the guy who's running for that seat, he's a local guy and he works his butt off, and I think he was lucky to lose it the last time. So it might be just that the tide has turned enough.
In Edinburgh South, we've got friends that live in Edinburgh South, but you stand a snowball's chance in hell here, because the Tories that live next door to me, they get everyone to vote for Ian Murray. That's who the Tories vote for in this area. So, but that's like, so the Tories' last stand in Scotland is going to be a Labour MP.
Yes. Again, from the English papers, but now we've got Keir Starmer. Surely Labour will retake Scotland now. And you think, no, you're not getting it.
That ship has sailed.
Yeah. I think he'd be great as a Prime Minister of England. I would quite happily have him as the Prime Minister of the country next door, but, until he changes his views on the Constitution that we currently have, then he's entertaining to watch at PMQ.
He's an MI5 plant, is what he is. There's lots of information out there. They're still destroying Corbyn. They're not finished with him yet. And yet, but they are. They're going to turn on us big time.
I thought it was priceless, though, Johnson's line about this union should endure in sickness and in health. How dare he quote from the marriage vows? That man, I mean, that to me, sorry if this offends anybody, that is proof to me that there is no God, because if there was, a lightning bolt would have come down right then.
That's another cartoon.
It's amazing. There's no coverage on the fact that sterling is plummeting after all the breakdown in talks with the United States and with Europe at the same time. So everyone's saying, sterling finished. So in a couple of months' time, it's going to be probably below the euro. But no coverage whatsoever on the financial background.
And you have to wonder, actually, if that's why he's headed up to Orkney. So, of course, we're all going to blitz that, and who knows what they're sneaking through.
Yeah, it's always that, isn't it? It's always whilst we're having a wee bit of a laugh and relishing in his excruciating visit to Scotland, you're thinking, what are they slipping in underneath? What are they getting in through the back door, He comes out the back door, something goes in through the back door.
In the last section of this week's podcast, we're going to do some collaboration with the Russians, in a poetic sense, that is. And we've got a real treat for you coming up. But first, we probably do need to acknowledge that this is the week in which the long-awaited Russia report was finally released. And do you know what's really odd? When I have been Googling just to get some facts and figures about what this report revealed, there is nothing more recent than November 2019 when you Google Russian report. And when you Google Russian report Tories, you get a couple more entries talking about the report about to be published, but nothing about what was in it. How does that work? So although Google no longer brings it up, I did keep a note of an article in The Guardian from earlier in the week, which had some facts and figures in it. And it does appear that without Russian donations, the Tory party would be very, very much worse off. The Conservatives have received more than 3 million from wealthy Soviet-born donors. Now, this is legal. They are British citizens, but they include Alexander Termenko, a former Russian defense minister, Lyubov Chernukin, a financier whose husband Vladimir served in Putin's cabinet, and there was also a list of 14 Tory MPs who had received Russian donations. It's also notable, I think, that Boris Johnson has not said a word about the report, having delayed its publication so that it didn't come out before the election in November, and it's only coming out now when we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're about to crash out of Brexit. He's up in Orkney displaying giant crabs. Anything to deflect attention away from the fact that what clearly comes out of the report is that the UK has done nothing to protect itself against the threat of interference from whoever, and continues not to do it. When you realise how much money the Tory party actually get from Russian donations, no wonder they're not looking too much under it. This is just, corruption. When you think back to the 60s and the Cold War, and all these spies who were selling secrets to the what was then the Soviets, they didn't come from downtown, lower-class suburbs in Stockton. They came from Eton. They came from Cambridge. They came from the same group of overprivileged white men who are now running the United Kingdom. The quicker we get out of this cesspit, the better. But it is always worth remembering, I think, that we should not define an entire country by who they happen to have in government, and that's as true of the UK as it is of Russia, I'm sure. Lots of decent people there just looking on aghast as we are at what's going on in Westminster. So today we're going to collaborate with the Russians in a much more positive sense, and I'm going to share a little bit about a poet, Mikhail Lermontov, who was born in Moscow in 1814, died tragically early at the age of 26 in a duel, and as far as we know, never left Russia. So how come a statue of him has just been unveiled in the Scottish Borders market town of Earlston? Well, it turns out that Lermontov is a descendant of George Learmont, one of the original adventurous, high-achieving Scots who left home in search of fame and fortune. Learmont was an early adventurer who left Fife in 1613 to fight for Tsar Mikhail Romanov and founded the famous Lermontov dynasty. Another older and even more mysterious forebear was the 13th century bard called Thomas the Rhymer, who was also known by the surname Learmonth. He came from the town of Earlston. Thomas the Rhymer met the Queen of Elfland in the Eildon Hills, and she gave him the gift of prophecy. Some say that the poet Lermontov also had that gift because one of his poems appeared to prophesy the Russian Revolution, foretelling a year when the Russian crown shall fall and the food of many shall be blood and death. Lermontov was very proud, we think, of his Scottish ancestry, and one of his poems, Yearning, he talked about his desire to fly to the land of his forefathers, and that's what we're going to play for you now. And what's very special about this is that we've got a sort of dual recording. We're going to, first of all, have it performed in Russian, and then the English translation is going to be read by Anne, one of the Women for Indie. And just to make it even more special, we've set it to a little bit of music too. And if you want even more, we have also added some pictures. And if you look on the Indyliveradio YouTube channel, there's a playlist where you'll find the Clacks WFI podcasts, and you'll find the illustrated version of the poetry recitation in that playlist. So I hope you enjoy this. I think it's lovely.
Желание. Михаил Юрьевич Лермонтов. Зачем я не птица, не ворон степной, пролетевший сейчас надо мной? Зачем не могу в небесах я парить и одну лишь свободу любить? На запад помчался бы я, где цветут моих предков поля, где в замке пустом на туманных горах их забвенный покоится прах. На древней стене их наследственный щит, и заржавленный меч их висит. Я стал бы летать над мечом и щитом, и смахнул бы я пыль с них крылом. И арфы шотландской струну бы задел, и по сводам бы звук полетел. Внимаем одним и одним пробужден, как раздался, так смолкнул бы он. Но тщетны мечты, бесполезны мольбы против строгих законов судьбы. Меж мной и холмами отчизны моей расстилаются волны морей. Последний потомок отважных бойцов увядает средь чуждых снегов. Я здесь был рожден, но не здешней душой. О, зачем я не ворон степной?
If I were a raven, a raptor of the plain, whirling far above this earthly brain, if I could only my desires betake to wing, and all at once my heart were free to sing. To the west I'd be gone in an hour, where the fields of my sires are in flower, where in a bare keep neath the swirling of mists their oblivious bones are lying at rest, where on ancient walls ancestral shields hang above a broadsword, rusty and lang. I would fly over the sword and the shield, brushing the dust of ages as I wheeled, grazing the neglected Scottish harp strings as again through the chamber it rings, and is heard by the one who awakes, and as it reverberates, so the spell breaks. But disconsolate dreams, unfulfillable yearning against the strict edicts of fate not returning. Between me and the hills of my native land, billowing furrows lie twixt either strand, the last scion of a race that routed foes, desiccating here amongst the alien snows. Ah, I was born here, but I would be fain. Oh, why am I not a raptor of the plain?
Oh, isn't that a beautiful poem? So again, if you want to have a look at that with pictures as well, it's in the Indyliveradio YouTube channel in the Clacks WFI podcast playlist. And thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Do svidania.